The night my younger brother locked me out of our grandmother's house, I was still holding a grocery bag with a store-brand cake inside. It was December 23rd, 9:42 p.m., and snow had started to fall in thin, sharp lines that stung my face. The porch light was on. The door was closed. My key didn't work. I stood there for a full 10 seconds before I knocked. Not hard, not soft. Just enough to say I was still trying to be reasonable. From inside, I heard footsteps. Then the lock clicked again, deliberately. The door opened only halfway. "You can't be here, Claire," my brother said. His name is Daniel Morrison. He's 31. He didn't look surprised to see me standing there, with numb fingers and a stupid cake melting through the cardboard. He looked prepared. If you've ever had a moment where your place in your own family suddenly disappears, you know the exact kind of quiet that followed. Before I tell you how that happened, stay with me. Like the story, leave a comment if you've ever been pushed out by your own blood, and subscribe if you want to hear how I handled what came next. Because this didn't end on that porch. My name is Claire Morrison. I was 34 that winter. I worked as a compliance analyst for a regional healthcare network in Ohio, earning $78,400 a year, managing audits no one else wanted, and cleaning up mistakes people above me never admitted to. I was reliable, invisible, useful. That was the role I played in my family, too. Daniel was always the one with potential. That was the word everyone used. Potential. My mother, Susan Morrison, used it like punctuation. My grandmother, Evelyn Morrison, said it with pride. Even my father, Richard Morrison, before he passed, talked about Daniel like the future was already written in his name. I was the present, the one who handled things. It started small, the way it always does. After my father died of a sudden stroke when I was 26, my mother unraveled quietly. Not in a dramatic way. She just stopped deciding things. Bills went unpaid. Appointments were missed. Someone had to step in. That someone was me. Daniel was 23 then, finishing a communications degree he would never use. He moved back home temporarily. Temporary turned into permanent. I moved back too, for a while, to help. That while lasted 18 months. I organized my father's estate. I dealt with probate court in Franklin County. I found the will. It was simple. Everything went to my mother. The house, the savings, no drama. At least, not then. My grandmother Evelyn lived 10 minutes away in a large, aging colonial she'd owned since 1979. She was sharp, opinionated, and deeply attached to tradition. Sunday dinners, Christmas Eve rituals, assigned seats, assigned roles. Daniel sat at her right hand. I sat near the kitchen. At first, it was just comments. "You're so good at this kind of thing, Claire," Susan would say when I handled paperwork. "Daniel's more creative." "You don't need much space," my grandmother once said when I asked if I could store some boxes in the spare room. Daniel might need that room someday. When I turned 30, no one remembered my birthday until 3 days later. Daniel's 29th was a catered dinner. I noticed. I always noticed. I just didn't react. The shift happened the year my grandmother turned 84. Evelyn Morrison fell in her driveway in early March. Cracked her hip. Not a full break, but enough to change things. She needed help. Daily help. Daniel volunteered immediately. Loudly. "I'll move in," he announced at the hospital. "I can take care of Grandma." Everyone looked relieved. Everyone, except me. Daniel had never taken care of anything. But no one asked me what I thought. They never did. I adjusted my schedule. I drove over after work to check medications. I installed grab bars in the bathroom with my own money. I coordinated with her physical therapist. Daniel posted photos of them watching old movies together. People praised him constantly. "That boy has such a good heart," neighbors said. Evelyn started calling him my rock. I was the background noise. One evening in late June, as I was refilling her pill organizer, I overheard Daniel on the phone in the den. "Yeah," he said casually. "She trusts me with everything now. I'm basically handling all the important stuff." I stood there, holding a bottle of blood pressure medication, and felt something shift. Not anger. recognition. A few weeks later, my grandmother asked me to sit down at the kitchen table. "I've made some decisions," Evelyn said, folding her hands. "About the future." I nodded. I was used to being informed, not consulted. "Daniel's been such a comfort," she continued. "I've added him to my accounts, just to help manage things." I asked one question. "All of them?" She hesitated. That was my answer. That night, I pulled public records. Franklin County Recorder. Property deeds are easy to search if you know how. The house was still in her name, but a transfer document had been drafted. Not filed yet, drafted. The attorney listed was a man named Harold Klein, downtown Columbus, estate planning. I didn't say anything. Not yet. Then came Thanksgiving. It was held at my grandmother's house, as always. Extended family, neighbors, the usual noise. Halfway through dinner, Evelyn tapped her glass. "I want to say how grateful I am," she said, "especially to Daniel, who's given up so much to be here for me." Everyone applauded. Daniel smiled, humble, practiced. "And Claire," she added, almost as an afterthought, "for helping when she can." I felt something harden then. Not break. Set. After dessert, Daniel pulled me aside near the back hallway. "You should start thinking about moving on," he said quietly. "You know, building your own life." I looked at him. Really looked. And realized he believed he was already replacing me. Christmas was 2 weeks away when my mother called. "Daniel thinks it might be best," Susan said carefully, "if you don't stay over at Grandma's anymore. She needs calm, consistency." I didn't argue. I showed up anyway on December 23rd with a cake, because that's what I'd always done. And that's how I ended up on the porch, snow soaking through my shoes. My brother telling me I didn't belong there anymore. Behind him, I could see my grandmother's silhouette in the hallway. She didn't come closer. "Grandma?" I called. Daniel didn't turn around. "She's resting," he said. "You need to leave." That was the moment I understood. I wasn't just being ignored. I was being removed. I stepped back into the snow. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I looked at the house. The one I'd maintained, protected, quietly served. And I made a decision. They thought this was over. It wasn't even started. I didn't drive away right after Daniel shut the door. I stood at the bottom of the porch steps, the grocery bag sagging in my hand, and waited. Not because I expected anyone to come after me, but because I needed to feel the decision settle. Snow gathered on the shoulders of my coat. The house stayed quiet. That silence told me more than any argument could have. I left the cake on the hood of my car. It slid slightly as I pulled away, then tipped and fell onto the driveway. I didn't stop. I drove straight to my apartment on High Street, a one-bedroom I'd kept even when I was helping out at my grandmother's. That night, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat at the small kitchen table and opened my laptop. I wasn't angry yet. I was focused. The first thing I did was pull my grandmother's recent banking activity. Not illegally. I still had login access, because I'd set it up years ago, back when Evelyn Morrison had decided online banking was too confusing, and Daniel was too busy. Large transfers had started in May, small at first, then larger. Money moving between accounts Daniel had joint access to. The second thing I checked was county filings again. This time, there was an update. The draft deed transfer had been filed 3 days earlier. Daniel Morrison was now listed as joint owner of the house, with right of survivorship. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. That was the first moment I felt something like betrayal. Not sharp, controlled, like pressure behind the eyes. At 11:18 p.m., my mother texted, "Susan Morrison, let's talk after the holidays. Please don't upset your grandmother." I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a new document and titled it simply, Timeline. I wrote dates, conversations, witnesses, amounts. I noted every time I'd paid for repairs. The $3,600 furnace replacement, the $1,200 roof patch after the hailstorm, the months I'd handled grocery runs, prescriptions, doctor coordination. Daniel had been present. I had been responsible. By midnight, I knew something else was happening beneath the surface. This wasn't just favoritism. It was preparation. Christmas came and went without me. I worked extra shifts at the office, volunteered to cover year-end compliance reporting. I let people assume I had plans. I let them stop asking. On December 28th, my grandmother's attorney, Harold Klein, called me. "Claire," he said in a voice that was professionally warm, "your grandmother asked me to inform you of some changes she's made." "I'm aware," I replied. There was a pause, a recalibration. "I see," he said. "Then you understand that Daniel is now acting as primary agent." "I understand what's been filed," I said. "I don't understand why." "That's a family matter," Harold Klein replied gently. "Legally, everything is in order." I thanked him and ended the call. That night, I slept for 4 hours. At 6:12 a.m., I woke up with clarity. If this was going to escalate, I needed to stop reacting and start controlling the narrative. I took a personal day and drove to the Franklin County Courthouse. I pulled probate records from my father's estate. I requested copies of the original will. I asked questions clerks weren't used to answering from family members who hadn't hired lawyers yet. By noon, I knew something Daniel didn't expect. My grandmother's house wasn't just a house. It was part of a trust my grandfather had established decades ago, one that included clauses about caregiving, residency, and misuse of funds by agents. Clauses no one had bothered to read carefully. On January 3rd, I went back to the house, not to confront anyone, to observe. Daniel's car was in the driveway. A new one. Black SUV. Temporary tags. Inside, the house smelled different. Candles. New furniture. My grandmother's old armchair was gone. "Claire," Evelyn said when she saw me, startled. "You should have called." "I tried," I said calmly. Daniel appeared from the kitchen, jaw tightening. "We talked about boundaries," he said. "I'm here to see Grandma," I replied. Evelyn looked between us, uncomfortable. "Daniel's handling things now," she said. "It's easier." I nodded. "For you or for him?" That was the wrong question. "Don't start," Daniel snapped. "You always do this. Make things complicated." I looked at my grandmother. Her eyes avoided mine. "I'll leave," I said, "but I'll be back. We need to talk about the trust." Daniel froze. "What trust?" he asked too quickly. That was the second shift. Over the next 2 weeks, small things started going wrong for Daniel. His access to one account was flagged for unusual transfers. The bank requested clarification. A physical therapist reported concerns about medication management. A neighbor filed a noise complaint about late-night gatherings. None of it was dramatic. None of it traced back to me. On January 19th, my mother called again. "Daniel says you're trying to cause problems," Susan said. "I'm documenting them," I replied. "He's under a lot of stress." "So am I said. "The difference is, I'm not hiding it." She sighed. "Why can't you just let him handle this?" "Because he's not handling it," I said. "He's exploiting it." There was a long silence. "Your grandmother signed everything willingly," Susan finally said. "So did Dad," I replied. "And you know how that turned out, when we actually read the documents." That ended the call. The turning point came on February 2nd. I received a certified letter addressed to my apartment. It was a formal notice. Daniel Morrison, acting as co-owner, was requesting that I cease visiting the property to reduce emotional distress for Evelyn Morrison. He'd hired his own lawyer. The letter ended with a sentence that settled everything. "Failure to comply may result in further legal action." I folded the letter once and placed it on the table. They weren't just pushing me out emotionally anymore. They were making it official. That night, I made one call. Her name was Rebecca Lawson. She was an elder law attorney I'd worked with indirectly on a compliance audit 2 years earlier. She'd been thorough, unimpressed by theatrics. When she answered, I didn't explain my feelings. I explained facts. By the time I finished, there was no pity in her voice. "There are irregularities," Rebecca Lawson said, "and leverage." I looked out my apartment window at the dark street below. "Good," I replied, "because I'm done being patient." I didn't know yet how far this would go, how public it would become, or how ugly people get when they realize they're losing control. But I knew one thing with certainty. Daniel thought he'd already won, and that was going to cost him. Rebecca Lawson didn't rush. That was the first thing I noticed when I walked into her office on February 6th at exactly 8:30 a.m. She didn't smile too quickly. She didn't soften her tone. She read everything twice. Her office was on the 4th floor of a mid-rise building near the Scioto River. No view worth mentioning. Clean desk, no family photos. Just framed certifications and a single line of text mounted behind her chair. Preparation is leverage. I sat across from her and watched her read the letter from Daniel's lawyer, the filed deed, the trust summary I'd pulled from county records, the bank statements showing transfers that didn't align with caregiving expenses. She didn't interrupt me once while I explained how things had unfolded. When I finished, she folded her hands and looked at me carefully. "How old is your grandmother?" Rebecca Lawson asked. 84, I replied, turning 85 in April. "And when was the deed transfer executed?" "December 20th, 3 days before I was locked out," she nodded. "And Daniel Morrison moved in full-time when?" "March of last year, after her fall." Rebecca leaned back slightly. "So caregiving coincides with financial control?" "Yes." "And exclusion followed shortly after?" "Yes." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she stood up and went to a filing cabinet. "This isn't unusual," she said, pulling out a thin folder. "But it's sloppy." She laid out a yellow legal pad and began writing. "Here's what matters," she continued. "Your grandmother's trust has a conditional clause. It requires that any agent acting on her behalf must demonstrate fiduciary responsibility and act in her best interest. Joint ownership doesn't override misuse." I stayed quiet. "More importantly," Rebecca said, tapping the paper, "your brother initiated a change in ownership while acting as a caregiver, without independent counsel for your grandmother." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means undue influence is now on the table." I exhaled slowly. "For now," she added, "we don't confront. We document." Over the next 3 weeks, that became my full-time second job. I tracked everything. Daniel's spending patterns, changes in utility usage that didn't match Evelyn's habits, medical appointments canceled without explanation, witnesses who saw Daniel speaking for her when she was present and capable. I didn't argue with my family. I didn't defend myself. I let them assume I was bitter. Meanwhile, Rebecca Lawson filed a quiet request with the probate court for an accounting of the trust assets. Daniel received the notice on February 27th. That same evening, my phone rang. It was my grandmother. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. "Claire," Evelyn said, "why are lawyers involved?" "I didn't bring one into your house," I replied evenly. "I brought one into the paperwork." Daniel's voice came through faintly in the background. "Tell her to stop." I ignored it. "I just want clarity," I said to Evelyn. "That's all." There was a pause. Then, quietly, Daniel says, "You're trying to take things from me." I closed my eyes. "I'm trying to make sure nothing is taken from you," I said. She didn't respond. The call ended shortly after. The next escalation came faster than I expected. On March 5th, my mother showed up at my apartment, unannounced. Susan Morrison stood in my doorway, holding a tote bag like a shield. "You're tearing the family apart," she said without preamble. I stepped aside to let her in. She didn't sit. "Daniel is exhausted," she continued. "Your grandmother is confused. This legal nonsense is stressing her out." "Then Daniel shouldn't have changed ownership without transparency," I replied. Susan shook her head. "You've always been like this. You keep score." I looked at her carefully. "No, I keep records," she scoffed. "You're jealous. That's what this is." "Jealous of what?" I asked. "Responsibility?" She didn't answer that. Instead, she said something else. "Your grandmother updated her will." That landed exactly the way she intended. "When?" I asked. "Last week," Susan said. "Daniel was there." I nodded once. "Did she have independent counsel?" Susan hesitated. "Just a fraction too long." "He arranged everything," she said. "He's helping." After she left, I sat down and wrote one sentence in my timeline document. March 1st. Will updated under same conditions as deed transfer. That night, Rebecca Lawson confirmed what I already suspected. "If that will was modified without independent counsel," she said over the phone, "it's vulnerable." "Even if I'm excluded?" I asked. "Especially if you're excluded," she replied. The tension reached a new level on March 14th. I was at work when my phone buzzed with an alert from the courthouse system. A petition had been filed. Daniel Morrison was seeking to be appointed sole conservator of Evelyn Morrison's estate. The justification listed: family conflict and emotional instability caused by Claire Morrison. I stared at the screen for a long time. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about erasing me. By the time I met Rebecca that afternoon, My calm had shifted into something sharper. "He's moving faster because he thinks you won't push back," she said. "He's right about one thing," I replied. "I won't push emotionally." Rebecca looked at me. "Then how will you push?" I slid a printed email across her desk. It was from the assisted living facility my grandmother's physician had recommended months earlier, and Daniel had declined. "We request a second cognitive assessment," the email read. "Recent medication inconsistencies raise concerns." Rebecca read it once, then again. "This changes the trajectory," she said quietly. The hearing for conservatorship was scheduled for April 3rd. Public, recorded, formal. Daniel had planned to present himself as the devoted grandson, overwhelmed but noble. What he didn't realize was that every move he'd made had left fingerprints. And on April 3rd, he wouldn't be speaking alone. As I left Rebecca's office that day, my phone buzzed again. A text from Daniel. "You don't have to do this. We can fix it quietly." I didn't respond. Because the moment someone asks you to stop protecting yourself quietly, it means the noise is about to reach places they can't control. The week before the hearing moved slowly, like time had thickened. Every day, I woke up at 5:40 a.m., drank black coffee, and reviewed the same documents with new eyes. I wasn't looking for proof anymore. I was looking for patterns. Pressure. Timing. Who benefited and when. Rebecca Lawson called it building a narrative. Judges called it context. Daniel Morrison called it betrayal. On March 27th, he left me a voicemail. His voice was calm, rehearsed. "You've always wanted control, Claire," he said. "This is just another way you're trying to punish me for stepping up." I saved the message. Not because it was useful legally, but because it clarified something. He didn't think he was doing anything wrong. 2 days later, my grandmother's primary care physician, Dr. Michael Alvarez, submitted his written assessment to the court. He didn't accuse, he observed. Medication schedules altered. Appointments missed or canceled by agent. Patient answering less frequently in her own voice. Rebecca forwarded it to me with a single line. "This will be read aloud." On April 1st, my mother called again. Susan Morrison sounded tired. Not defensive. Tired. "He says you're going to put Grandma on the stand," she said. "I'm not," I replied. "The court is. That will humiliate her." "What's humiliating," I said, "is treating her like a signature instead of a person." Susan didn't argue this time. On the morning of April 3rd, I wore a gray blazer and flat shoes. No jewelry. No makeup, beyond what made me look awake. I wasn't there to perform. The Franklin County Probate Court smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. Courtroom 4B was already half full when I arrived. Neighbors, distant relatives, people who liked drama when it wasn't theirs. Daniel was there with his attorney, a man named Thomas Grady, late 40s, confident posture, expensive suit. He nodded at me once, like we were colleagues. My mother sat 2 rows behind him. She didn't look at me. My grandmother was wheeled in last. Evelyn Morrison looked smaller than I remembered, wrapped in a cardigan I didn't recognize. Her eyes found Daniel immediately. Rebecca Lawson arrived beside me and placed a hand lightly on my arm. Grounding. Professional. When the judge entered, the room stilled. Judge Karen Whitfield didn't waste time. She had a reputation for clarity. "Mr. Morrison," she said to Daniel, "you're requesting sole conservatorship. On what grounds?" Daniel stood. He spoke about devotion, sacrifice, family conflict. My name was used 3 times, always with the same phrase, emotionally disruptive. Then Rebecca stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize. She asked questions. "Mr. Morrison, when did you begin managing your grandmother's finances?" Daniel answered confidently. "Were you trained in fiduciary responsibility?" "No. But did you seek independent counsel for your grandmother before altering ownership of her home?" Daniel paused. "No." "Did you inform other immediate family members?" "No." "Did you restrict access to the property by another family member?" Daniel looked at me for the first time. "Yes." The judge leaned forward slightly. Rebecca continued. "She introduced documents, receipts, bank transfers, the trust clause. Then she called Dr. Michael Alvarez, then the assisted living coordinator, then the bank compliance officer, who explained why an account had been flagged. The room shifted. When it was time for Evelyn to speak, the judge addressed her gently. "Mrs. Morrison," Judge Whitfield said, Do you understand why we're here today? Evelyn hesitated, looked at Daniel. I think so, she said. They think my grandson is taking advantage of me. Judge Whitfield didn't react. Do you feel pressured to make decisions you don't understand? Evelyn opened her mouth, closed it. Daniel's jaw tightened. I trust Daniel, Evelyn said finally. And do you trust Claire? The judge asked. Evelyn turned slowly toward me. I didn't smile. I didn't plead. I trust Claire with details, she said. She always handled details. That sentence did more than any argument could have. The judge nodded once. After a brief recess, Judge Whitfield delivered her decision. The petition for sole conservatorship was denied. An independent, temporary conservator would be appointed immediately. A full accounting of trust assets was ordered, and any further changes to ownership or estate documents were frozen pending review. Daniel's attorney leaned toward him, whispering urgently. Daniel didn't move. When the gavel struck, the sound was clean, final. Outside the courtroom, Daniel caught up to me in the hallway. You did this to embarrass me, he said, voice low. You could have handled this privately. I looked at him. You made it public when you tried to erase me, I replied. Susan approached then. Her eyes were wet, not crying, processing. I didn't know, she said quietly. I know, I replied. That's the problem. As I walked out of the courthouse, I felt something unfamiliar. Not victory, space. But this wasn't the end. It was the shift. Because once control starts slipping, people don't let go quietly. And Daniel still believed the house was his. He was about to learn how wrong that assumption was. Control doesn't vanish all at once. It erodes. And Daniel Morrison didn't notice the erosion at first. The court's decision didn't remove him from the house. Not yet. It didn't accuse him of fraud. Not yet. What it did was worse for someone like him. It put him under observation. The temporary conservator appointed by the court was named Margaret Hill, 62, former CPA, calm, methodical, immune to charm. She began her work the following Monday. Her first action was simple. She asked for keys, all of them. Daniel handed them over with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I wasn't present for that exchange. I didn't need to be. Margaret Hill sent me a short email afterward. Access secured. Initial review underway. The house changed after that. When I visited my grandmother under the new supervised schedule, I noticed what Daniel hadn't bothered to hide anymore. Credit card statements left on the counter. New electronics that had nothing to do with caregiving. A wine fridge installed in the dining room. Evelyn didn't comment on any of it. She seemed tired, not confused. Tired. On April 12th, Margaret Hill requested receipts for care-related expenditures from the past 12 months. Daniel produced some. Not all. 2 days later, his attorney requested a private meeting with Rebecca Lawson. That request told me everything. In the meantime, something else surfaced. I received a call from my cousin, Laura Bennett, who lived in Cleveland and rarely involved herself in family matters. Claire, she said, hesitant. I don't know if this matters, but Daniel asked me something strange last year. I listened. He wanted me to convince Grandma to move money into a different account. He said it was to protect it from taxes. I didn't do it. It felt off. I thanked her and documented it. On April 18th, Margaret Hill froze 2 of the accounts Daniel had been using. The justification was neutral. Pending clarification. Daniel responded by escalating emotionally. He sent long emails to my mother about betrayal and loyalty. He left me a voicemail accusing me of poisoning the family. He told my grandmother I was trying to institutionalize her. None of it changed the paperwork. On April 22nd, Rebecca Lawson called me at work. I need you to come in, she said. Today. When I arrived, she had a thin file on her desk. Margaret Hill found something, she said. She slid a document toward me. A personal loan application. Borrower, Daniel Morrison. Amount, $146,000. Collateral, anticipated inheritance interest in residential property. Filed 6 months earlier. I stared at the date. October 14th, before the fall. Before the deed change. Before everything. He planned this, I said quietly. Yes, Rebecca replied. and he misrepresented his authority. That shifted the case from family dispute to financial misconduct. Rebecca filed a supplemental motion the next morning. Daniel was notified by certified mail. That evening, my mother showed up at my apartment again. Susan Morrison looked smaller than she had weeks earlier. "He never told me," she said, "about the loan." "I know," I replied. She sat down this time. "I thought he was finally being responsible," she said. "I thought you were just resentful." I didn't correct her. I let the silence do that work. "What happens now?" she asked. "That depends on what Daniel does next," I said. The answer came sooner than expected. On April 30th, I received a notification from Margaret Hill. Unauthorized attempt to transfer property interest blocked. Daniel had tried to move fast. That was his mistake. The court scheduled an emergency review for May 6th. This time, Daniel didn't look confident when he entered the courtroom. This time, his attorney looked tired. Margaret Hill testified. So did the bank office. Rebecca Lawson presented the loan application. Judge Karen Whitfield didn't interrupt once. When Daniel was asked to explain, he spoke about intention, about plans, about future success. The judge listened. Then she asked one question. "Mr. Morrison, whose property were you offering as collateral?" Daniel hesitated. "My grandmother's," he said. Eventually, the word hung in the air. Judge Whitfield's ruling was brief. Daniel Morrison was removed as co-owner, pending full investigation. He was ordered to vacate the property within 14 days. A forensic audit was authorized. The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. Outside, Daniel confronted me again. "You could have stopped this," he said, voice tight. "You wanted this." I looked at him. "No," I replied. "You did." That night, I sat alone in my apartment and felt the weight of it. Not satisfaction, responsibility, because the truth was out now. And truth has momentum. And Daniel still hadn't accepted the one thing that mattered most. This wasn't about winning. It was about consequences. And consequences were just beginning to catch up with him. Daniel Morrison moved out on May 17th, not quietly. He didn't pack at night or leave a key on the counter. He made a show of it. Boxes on the lawn, doors slammed harder than necessary. He spoke loudly to anyone who would listen. "This is what betrayal looks like," he said, to no one in particular. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. Margaret Hill sent me a message at 4:12 p.m. Property vacated. Locks changed. Inventory documented. That was enough. My grandmother didn't ask where Daniel had gone. She noticed his absence in smaller ways. The television stayed off. The house returned to its old rhythms. Meals were quieter. One afternoon, as I was helping her water the garden, she said something that stayed with me. "He was always in a hurry," Evelyn Morrison said. "Like the house was temporary." I nodded. I didn't add anything. On May 21st, the forensic audit began in earnest. 3 years of transactions, categorized, cross-referenced, compared against care expenses. It took less than 2 weeks to identify the pattern. Daniel had been siphoning money in increments small enough to avoid immediate detection. Gas, electronics, travel, payments to a consulting LLC registered in his name. Total amount misappropriated, $92,740. Margaret Hill delivered the report to the court on June 3rd. Rebecca Lawson forwarded me the executive summary with one sentence. "This is no longer a family issue." The following week, Daniel's attorney withdrew from representation. The reason was listed as irreconcilable differences. On June 10th, my grandmother asked to speak with me alone. We sat in the living room, the afternoon light catching dust motes in the air. She held her hands together in her lap. "I didn't want to see it," Evelyn said. "I wanted him to be good." "I know," I replied. "He needed to feel important," she continued. "And I let that matter more than fairness." I waited. "I hurt you," she said finally. "By allowing it." I met her eyes. "Yes," I said. "Not harsh, not gentle. Honest." She nodded. "I'm sorry." That apology didn't erase anything, but it acknowledged reality. That mattered. 2 days later, she asked Rebecca Lawson to draft a new will, this time with independent counsel, with Margaret Hill present, with every clause read aloud. The house remained in the trust. No individual ownership, no shortcuts. When it was done, Evelyn looked relieved. "I should have done this sooner," she said. "Yes," Rebecca replied. "You should have." The criminal referral was filed on June 18th. Misuse of fiduciary funds, fraudulent loan representation, financial exploitation of an elder. Daniel was served on June 22nd. He called me that night. I let it go to voicemail. His message was short. "I never meant for it to go this far." I deleted it. On July 1st, the family gathered for the first time in months. Not at the house. At my mother's place. Susan Morrison didn't cook. She ordered catering. No one pretended things were normal. Daniel wasn't invited. The absence was noticeable. But so was the calm. After dinner, Susan asked me to stay behind. "I don't know how I didn't see it," she said. "You saw what you wanted to see," I replied. She nodded. "And I didn't protect you." I didn't answer right away. "I protected myself," I said eventually. That was enough. The legal process moved slowly after that. Indictments take time. Audits take time. But consequences have a way of arriving even before verdicts. Daniel's loan defaulted. His credit collapsed. The consulting LLC dissolved under scrutiny. People stopped returning his calls. On August 9th, he was formally charged. The headline didn't mention family drama. It mentioned elder exploitation and financial fraud. That distinction mattered because stories change when the truth is documented. I visited my grandmother that evening. She was sitting in her armchair, reading. "Do you hate him?" she asked suddenly. I considered the question. "No," I said. "I don't trust him." She nodded slowly. "Neither do I anymore." That was the end of denial, but not the end of the story. Because accountability doesn't just punish, it rearranges relationships. And the final reckoning wouldn't happen in a courtroom. It would happen at a place Daniel once thought untouchable. The house. And what it now represented. That was coming next. The house felt different once Daniel was gone. Not lighter. Quieter. The kind of quiet that lets you hear what's been ignored. I started coming over twice a week. Not as a caretaker, not as an enforcer, just present. I helped Evelyn Morrison organize old paperwork. Boxes that had been pushed aside for years. It was neutral work, safe. One afternoon in late August, we found a locked metal file box in the back of a hall closet. "I forgot about that," Evelyn said, squinting at it. "Your grandfather kept important things there." The key was taped to the back of a photo frame. Inside were documents older than either of us expected. Original trust papers, amendments, letters. One envelope stood out, yellowed. My name written on it in my grandfather's handwriting. Evelyn watched me closely as I opened it. Inside was a single-page letter, dated 1998. It explained something no one had ever said out loud. When my grandfather established the trust, he'd done it because he'd seen favoritism fracture his own family. The trust wasn't just about property. It was about balance. He'd written one line that stayed with me. "Fairness is not automatic. It has to be protected." I handed the letter to Evelyn. She read it slowly. Twice. "That sounds like him," she said. It also sounded like an answer. On September 3rd, Rebecca Lawson called me with an update. "The prosecutor wants your statement," she said. "Not emotional, just factual." I agreed. The interview took an hour. Dates, actions, documentation, no speculation. The assistant district attorney thanked me at the end. "This case is strong," she said, "because you didn't escalate. You preserved evidence." I nodded. That night, my phone buzzed with a message I hadn't expected. Daniel Morrison. I blocked his number weeks earlier. This came from an unknown contact. "I just want to talk. No lawyers, no court, just us." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I forwarded it to Rebecca. Her reply came back quickly. "Do not respond. Let the process work." 2 days later, he showed up anyway. Not at my apartment, at the house. I arrived to find his car parked across the street. Margaret Hill had already been notified. I didn't turn around. Daniel was standing near the front walk when I stepped out of my car. He looked thinner, less controlled. "You don't get to be here," I said calmly. "I grew up here," he replied. "You don't get to rewrite that." "I'm not rewriting anything," I said. "You are." Evelyn watched from the window. "Grandma," Daniel called out. "Tell her." She didn't move. "I need help," he said then, quieter. "They're trying to ruin me." I met his eyes. "No," I said. "They're documenting you." Sirens sounded in the distance. Daniel looked past me, then back. "You always wanted to be right," he said. I shook my head. "I wanted to be safe," I replied. Margaret Hill arrived with a police officer. Not to arrest, to escort. Daniel didn't resist. He didn't apologize either. As he walked away, he said one last thing. "You think this ends with me losing everything?" I didn't respond, because he was wrong. It didn't end with him losing. It ended with me refusing to keep losing. That evening, Evelyn asked me to sit with her. "I let the wrong person speak for me," she said. "For too long." "Yes," I replied. "I want you to be my voice now," she said. I considered that carefully. "I'll help," I said, "but I won't replace your agency." She smiled faintly. Good. In September, the court finalized the trust restructuring, shared oversight, no single agent, mandatory reporting, no room for manipulation. The House became what it was always meant to be, neutral ground. But the story wasn't finished, because consequences don't always hit hardest when they're loud. Sometimes they land quietly. And Daniel was about to learn what it means to be excluded. Not from a house, from credibility, from trust, from the future he thought was guaranteed. That reckoning was already in motion. Exclusion doesn't announce itself. It shows up in small absences. Daniel Morrison's case didn't dominate the news cycle. There were no cameras, no dramatic perp walk, just filings, hearings, and quiet withdrawals. The first absence was professional. In early October, I received an email from a former colleague of Daniel's. We'd met once at a family dinner years earlier. The subject line was neutral. "Quick question." She didn't ask directly. She didn't need to. She wanted to know whether the charges were real. I answered with facts. Public record, nothing else. 2 weeks later, Daniel's name disappeared from the company website where he'd once listed himself as a consultant. The second absence was social. Invitations stopped coming. Not to me, to him. I heard it through neighbors, through family friends who didn't mean to gossip, but did anyway. He wasn't invited to Thanksgiving. He wasn't included in a cousin's engagement party. He wasn't asked to speak at an alumni event he'd once bragged about. People don't confront when trust breaks. They distance. On October 19th, the prosecutor offered a plea agreement. 2 felony counts, reduced to 1 in exchange for restitution and cooperation, probation, financial monitoring, no jail time. Daniel rejected it. He still thought he could talk his way out. On October 27th, Evelyn Morrison had a small stroke. Not severe. A warning, the doctor said. I was with her when it happened. I held her hand in the ER while nurses moved efficiently around us. She was conscious, afraid, but aware. I didn't want him here, she said quietly. I know, I replied. Daniel didn't come to the hospital. No one told him. That was deliberate. Recovery was slow, but steady. When she returned home, she asked for changes. No more secrets, she said. No more protecting people who hurt us. The house adapted. New locks, new routines, transparency. In November, Daniel's trial date was set for January 11th. Public. On the docket. That was when the messages started again. Not from him directly, from people around him. He's struggling. He didn't mean it like that. Family should handle this privately. I didn't engage, because I had learned something important. Silence isn't weakness when it's chosen. On Thanksgiving morning, I stood in the kitchen of the house and cooked for Evelyn. Just us. No extended family, no performance. She watched me from the table. I should have protected you, she said again. You're doing it now, I replied. After dinner, she handed me a folder. These are letters, she said. I wrote them over the years. To your mother, to Daniel, to you. I opened mine later that night. It wasn't an apology. It was an acknowledgement of imbalance, of expectation, of regret. That mattered more. December arrived quietly. On December 3rd, Daniel was formally disinvited from the annual Morrison Christmas gathering. Not by me, by consensus. He responded by emailing everyone. Long, defensive, self-pitying. No one replied. On December 15th, Rebecca Lawson called me with a different kind of update. There's been a development, she said. Daniel tried to move assets again. How? I asked. Through a third party, a friend. It failed. I wasn't surprised. Will it affect sentencing? I asked. Yes, she replied. negatively. That night, I walked through the house alone. I stood in the hallway where Daniel had once blocked me. I felt nothing. No anger. No triumph. Just clarity. He had built his power on access, and access had been revoked. The night before Christmas Eve, Evelyn asked me a question that stopped me. "Do you think he'll ever understand?" she asked. I thought about it. "Understanding requires accountability," I said. "Not just consequences." She nodded slowly. "And accountability," I added, "isn't something you can give someone. It was something they had to accept." Daniel hadn't. And that choice would define what came next. Because January was approaching. And with it, the final turning point. The moment when everything he tried to control would be read back to him, in a room where words mattered more than excuses. January didn't arrive with drama. It arrived with paperwork. Court notices, schedules, lists of exhibits, everything reduced to ink and dates. Daniel Morrison's trial was set for January 11th at 9 a.m., Franklin County Criminal Court, Courtroom 2C. I wasn't required to attend every session, but I chose to be there on the first day. Not for him. For myself. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, atmospherically. Fluorescent lights, neutral walls. No room for narrative, just record. Daniel sat at the defense table, wearing a navy suit that didn't quite fit anymore. He looked older, smaller. When his eyes met mine, there was no anger in them. Just something like disbelief. The prosecution didn't rush. They laid out a timeline. October loan application. December deed change. Unauthorized transfers. Blocked asset movement. They didn't say betrayal. They said misrepresentation. They didn't say manipulation. They said pattern. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand without thinking about how I looked. I focused on what I knew. My role in the family was administrative, I said when asked. I handled records, payments, logistics. And when did that role change? The prosecutor asked. When I was excluded from access, I replied. By whom? Daniel Morrison. I didn't look at him when I said his name. The defense tried to reframe it. They suggested resentment, rivalry, misunderstanding. I answered with dates. The judge took notes. On the third day, the prosecution introduced the loan application. Daniel's signature was projected onto a screen. The prosecutor asked one question. Mr. Morrison, at the time you applied for this loan, did you have legal authority to pledge the property as collateral? Daniel hesitated. No, he said. That was it. The trial didn't drag after that. On January 18th, the verdict came back. Guilty. One count of felony financial exploitation of an elder. Sentencing was scheduled for February 6th. Outside the courtroom, reporters asked generic questions. I didn't answer. I walked to my car and sat there for several minutes before starting the engine. I didn't feel relief. I felt alignment. On January 25th, Daniel reached out again, this time through my mother. Susan Morrison called me, voice shaking. He wants to apologize, she said, before sentencing. I considered that carefully. Does he want to apologize? I asked. Or does he want something? She didn't answer. I'm not the person he needs to speak to, I said. The court is. She cried quietly on the other end of the line. I let her. February 6th arrived colder than January. Sentencing hearings are shorter. Less story, more outcome. Daniel stood when the judge addressed him. Judge Whitfield didn't raise her voice. You exploited trust, she said. And when confronted, you escalated. She sentenced him to 3 years of probation, full restitution, mandatory financial counseling, and a permanent prohibition from acting as fiduciary for any dependent adult. No jail, but no escape either. As he was let out, Daniel looked at me one last time. This time, there was no disbelief. There was understanding. Too late. That night, Evelyn asked me to sit with her again. I don't feel vindicated, she said. Neither do I replied. But I feel safe, she added. That mattered more. Because justice isn't about spectacle. It's about boundaries enforced when they were ignored. But the final chapter wasn't about Daniel. It was about what comes after survival. What happens when you stop managing crisis and start choosing yourself? That reckoning was quieter, and it was mine. It began the next morning with a decision I'd been postponing for years. The morning after Daniel's sentencing, I woke up without an alarm. That hadn't happened in years. For a long time, my life had been structured around anticipation. Who might need something? What might go wrong? which silence needed to be filled before it turned into a problem. I'd mistaken that vigilance for responsibility. Now there was nothing immediate to manage. That was unsettling. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and opened my laptop out of habit. My calendar looked empty in a way it never had before. No court dates, no document deadlines, no crisis check-ins. I stared at the screen and realized something uncomfortable. I didn't know what to do next. At work, my manager Patricia Nguyen asked if I'd be open to a conversation later that week. Nothing urgent, she said. Just something we've been discussing at the director level. I nodded, neutral. On Wednesday afternoon, I sat across from her in a glass-walled conference room. We're restructuring the compliance division, Patricia said, creating a senior role, oversight across 3 departments. She slid a printed description toward me. Title, Regional Compliance Lead. Salary, $104,000. Direct reports, 6. We'd like you to take it, she said. If you want it. I didn't answer immediately, not because I didn't want it, because I'd been conditioned to ask who else needed something first. I'll need to think about it, I said. Patricia smiled. Take your time. But no, this wasn't a consolation offer. You've been doing this work without the title for years. That night, I visited the house. Evelyn was asleep when I arrived. I let myself in quietly and sat in the living room. The space felt different again. Not because of what had been removed, but because of what no longer hovered. I thought about the letter my grandfather had written. Fairness is not automatic. It has to be protected. For years, I protected everyone else's comfort at the expense of my own direction. That was over. On February 12th, I accepted the promotion. I didn't announce it to my family. I updated my email signature and moved on. Susan found out a week later. She called me. Voice tentative. I heard about your new position, she said. I'm proud of you. Thank you, I replied. There was a pause. I wish I'd said that more often, she added. I didn't respond to that either. Because recognition after the fact doesn't change the past, but it can inform the future. In March, Evelyn's health stabilized enough that she no longer needed daily supervision. Margaret Hill remained involved, but less intrusively. Oversight without suffocation. One afternoon, Evelyn surprised me. I want to downsize, she said. Not now, but eventually. I looked at her. Only if you want to. I do, she replied. I want the house to be yours when that happens. Not as a burden, as a choice. I considered that carefully. I don't need ownership to feel secure, I said. She smiled. That's how I know you deserve it. In April, Daniel attempted one final contact. A letter, handwritten, delivered through his probation officer. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't manipulative. It was confused. He wrote about fear, about pressure, about believing that worth came from control. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked to be understood. I read it once. Then I filed it away. Understanding doesn't require re-entry. That spring, I took my first real vacation in over a decade. 5 days, no laptop, no emergency contacts. I went to a small coastal town in Maine where no one knew my name or my history. I walked, I read, I slept without checking my phone. I noticed something there. The absence of tension in my body. When I returned, I made one more decision. I stopped managing my family's emotional balance. I showed up when invited. I left when tired. I spoke when necessary. Nothing collapsed. That was the final lesson. You don't have to hold everything together for it to exist. And when you stop doing that, something else becomes possible. A life not built on reaction, but on choice. That realization carried me into the final season of this story, one where the consequences were complete, and the future was finally mine to define. By summer, the quiet had become normal. Not the fragile quiet that follows a crisis, where everyone waits for the next thing to break. This was different, stable, predictable, earned. I moved into a new rhythm. Work demanded more of me in ways that were visible now. As regional compliance lead, I wasn't just fixing problems after they surfaced. I was designing systems that prevented them. Policies, training, accountability structures. It felt familiar in a way I didn't expect. I'd been doing this my whole life, just without recognition. On June 14th, my mother invited me to lunch. Susan Morrison chose a cafe near her office. Neutral territory. She arrived early, That was new. I've been thinking a lot, she said after we ordered, about how things unfolded. I waited. I relied on you to absorb tension, she continued. And when Daniel demanded space, I gave it to him. At your expense. Yes, I said. She flinched slightly, then nodded. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. I just want a different relationship going forward. I considered that. Different how? I asked. More honest, she said. With boundaries. That would be necessary, I replied. We finished lunch without pretending we'd repaired anything, but we didn't reopen old wounds either. That was progress. Later that month, Evelyn asked me to accompany her to a community legal seminar. She wanted to speak about elder autonomy. I sat in the front row while she addressed a room of strangers. I trusted the wrong kind of devotion, she said. The kind that demands silence in return. People listened. Afterward, 3 women approached her, each with a similar story. She looked at me, eyes clear. This is what accountability looks like, she said quietly. In July, Daniel's restitution payments began. Small amounts. Automatic withdrawals. Court-mandated. No contact. No updates. Just proof the consequences endure beyond attention. One evening, I found an old photo album while helping Evelyn reorganize a closet. Daniel as a child. Me beside him. Both of us smiling, unaware. I closed the album without sentiment. Not because I felt nothing. Because I felt enough to let it stay where it belonged. In August, I hosted a small gathering at my apartment. Not a celebration. Just people I trusted. No obligation, no history. Susan came. So did a few colleagues. Evelyn stayed home, content. At the end of the night, my friend Hannah, who'd watched the entire ordeal from the outside, said something that landed. You're different, she said. Quieter, but solid. I thought about that later. Quiet doesn't mean passive. It means unmovable. As fall approached, Rebecca Lawson called me with final paperwork. The case is officially closed, she said. No appeals, no pending motions. Thank you, I replied. You handled this well, she added. Better than most. I learned, I said. There was one last thing to resolve. Not legally. Personally. In September, I went to the house alone. I stood in the living room where everything had escalated. I didn't replay the argument. I didn't imagine alternate endings. I acknowledged what had happened. Then I let it go. Because closure isn't about reconciliation. It's about release. The past had lost its leverage. And with that, only one chapter remained. The one where the story stopped being about what was taken and started being about what I chose to keep. That was the ending that mattered. Chapter 11. By summer, the quiet had become normal. Not the fragile quiet that follows a crisis, where everyone waits for the next thing to break. This was different. Stable. Predictable. Earned. I moved into a new rhythm. Work demanded more of me in ways that were visible now. As regional compliance lead, I wasn't just fixing problems after they surfaced. I was designing systems that prevented them. Policies, training, accountability structures. It felt familiar in a way I didn't expect. I'd been doing this my whole life, just without recognition. On June 14th, my mother invited me to lunch. Susan Morrison chose a cafe near her office. Neutral territory. She arrived early. That was new. I've been thinking a lot, she said after we ordered, about how things unfolded. I waited. I relied on you to absorb tension, she continued. And when Daniel demanded space, I gave it to him. At your expense. Yes, I said. She flinched slightly, then nodded. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. I just want a different relationship going forward. I considered that. Different how? I asked. More honest, she said. With boundaries. That would be necessary, I replied. We finished lunch without pretending we'd repaired anything, but we didn't reopen old wounds either. That was progress. Later that month, Evelyn asked me to accompany her to a community legal seminar. She wanted to speak about elder autonomy. I sat in the front row while she addressed a room of strangers. I trusted the wrong kind of devotion, she said. The kind that demands silence in return. People listened. Afterward, 3 women approached her, each with a similar story. She looked at me, eyes clear. This is what accountability looks like, she said quietly. In July, Daniel's restitution payments began. Small amounts. Automatic withdrawals. Court mandated. No contact. No updates. Just proof the consequences endure beyond attention. One evening, I found an old photo album while helping Evelyn reorganize a closet. Daniel as a child, me beside him, both of us smiling, unaware. I closed the album without sentiment, not because I felt nothing, because I felt enough to let it stay where it belonged. In August, I hosted a small gathering at my apartment, not a celebration, just people I trusted. No obligation, no history. Susan came. So did a few colleagues. Evelyn stayed home, content. At the end of the night, my friend Hannah, who'd watched the entire ordeal from the outside, said something that landed. "You're different," she said. "Quieter, but solid." I thought about that later. Quiet doesn't mean passive. It means unmovable. As fall approached, Rebecca Lawson called me with final paperwork. "The case is officially closed," she said. "No appeals, no pending motions." "Thank you," I replied. "You handled this well," she added. "Better than most." "I learned," I said. "There was one last thing to resolve, not legally, personally." In September, I went to the house alone. I stood in the living room where everything had escalated. I didn't replay the argument. I didn't imagine alternate endings. I acknowledged what had happened, then I let it go. Because closure isn't about reconciliation. It's about release. The past had lost its leverage. And with that, only one chapter remained. The one where the story stopped being about what was taken and started being about what I chose to keep. That was the ending that mattered. I didn't wake up one day feeling healed. That's not how it happened. What came instead was steadiness. The kind that doesn't ask for permission or validation. The kind that shows up quietly and stays. By October, my life no longer revolved around my family's gravity. I visited when I chose to. I answered calls when I had the capacity. I stopped anticipating disappointment and started noticing something else. Nothing bad happened when I didn't overextend. The world didn't collapse when I chose myself. Evelyn Morrison passed away the following spring, peacefully, in her sleep. She was 86. There was no chaos around her death, no scrambling, no sudden revelations. Everything had already been handled the way it should have been from the beginning. Her will was executed without dispute. The house remained in trust, designated to be sold, with proceeds distributed according to her clearly stated wishes. A portion went to local elder advocacy programs. The rest was divided evenly among remaining family members, including Daniel. That wasn't mercy. It was intention. Daniel received his share through a court-managed account, reduced by restitution, monitored, controlled. I didn't attend the sentencing follow-up where those details were finalized. I didn't need to. Some endings don't require witnesses. At the memorial service, Daniel stood on the opposite side of the room. We didn't speak. He looked at me once, as if measuring whether something could still be said. There wasn't. Not because I was angry, because the story between us had already concluded. After the service, my mother approached me. Susan Morrison looked older, softer. "I see you now," she said. I believed her. But belief didn't mean obligation. "I'm glad," I replied. "That's enough." A month later, I moved. Not far, just far enough. A different neighborhood, more light, fewer memories attached to walls. I brought only what I needed. The rest, I let go. At work, I was asked to lead a new initiative focused on ethical oversight in long-term care partnerships. The irony wasn't lost on me. I accepted without hesitation, not because it closed a loop, but because it aligned with who I had become. One evening, as I unpacked the last box in my new apartment, I found the timeline document I'd started months earlier. Dates, names, facts, the record of how I'd been pushed aside. I read the first page, then I deleted the file. Not out of denial, out of completion. Some lessons don't need to be archived forever. They just need to be integrated. Family, I learned, is not a title you earn by sacrifice alone. It's a relationship that must respect boundaries, agency, and truth. When those disappear, love becomes leverage, and stepping away becomes survival. I didn't get revenge in the dramatic sense. I didn't take anything that wasn't mine. What I did was refuse to stay small for the comfort of people who benefited from my silence. I chose clarity over approval, distance over dysfunction,
self-respect
over tradition. And in doing so, I got something far more permanent than payback. I got my life back. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been excluded, manipulated, or quietly erased by people who are supposed to protect you, you're not alone. Share your experience in the comments. Like this story if it gave language to something you've lived. And subscribe if you want to hear more real stories about family drama, betrayal, and the kind of justice that arrives slowly but lasts. Some tables don't flip overnight. They turn because someone finally stops holding them steady.